Good evening. We're starting this topic. It's called variation in selection. There are actually two topics, but they're pretty small and they're very important. They ask you a lot of questions, like those 4, 5, 6 marks questions about these two topics, especially the other one here, selection. But to understand this part about selection, you need to understand the first part, which is variation. Let's start with variation. What is meant by variation? Variation is simply how different are members of the same species. So all sorts of external or internal differences, including differences in DNA. One more time, the definition of variation stands for all differences. When I say all differences, I mean these differences could be phenotypes, features, external features, internal structures, like bones, for instance, and even it would include differences in our DNA. In fact, all the differences that we show in skin color, hair color, blood groups, all of these have to do with DNA because you reflect what's written in your DNA. You reflect your genetic code. So, someone asks you, what are the reasons behind all the variation that humans show? The reasons come from two things. As I said, it's the DNA. So your genes decide how you look like. So there are two main reasons here. One has to do with we call them the alleles. Those are the different versions of the genes that we receive from either parents. So that's one major source of variation, the DNA we receive from our parents. But there's also another thing that influences or changes the way we look, and that is the environment. So in other words, someone asks you, why do we look different? What are the main two reasons for variation? You're gonna first say it's the DNA, genetic variation, which has to do with the DNA that we receive from our parents. Second, it's the environment, environmental factors, such as sun exposure. Sun exposure changes your skin color. Diet changes your body mass and your height. But just think about it. It's not always the case. Environmental factors don't always change how we look like. There are certain features that don't change whatever happens in the environment. Think of your blood group. It would never change, right? Think of your eye color. That would never change with the environment. So in brief, variation are all the differences that we show, and they could be internal, external, but they always reflect your DNA. To make our life simpler, we divide variation into two types. So this was the cause of variation, the source of variation. But now I want to differentiate between two types of variation. One, we call it continuous variation. Now, this has to do with things that are influenced by the environment. I told you a couple of minutes ago, I told you that not all of our features are influenced by the environment. But if some features like height is influenced by the environment, then we describe this as continuous. Why do we call this continuous variation? Simply because height and other features that show continuous variation, they show gradual differences, very small differences among two extremes. You have the very tall, you have the shorter, and we have intermediates. Here, the word intermediate is a key word to identify continuous variation. One more time, what is continuous variation? It is that type of differences that we show and they are influenced by the environment. Other than height, think of another feature that also shows continuous variation other than height. Think of anything that could be influenced by the environment. One could be your skin tone, right? Your skin tone changes with the sun exposure, right? There is also usually things that are measurable, like body mass, your body weight, your changes with the environment too. So that also shows continuous variation. Now, continuous variation could be always, we have limits. So like the genes set the limit for the very tall and the very short, but then the environment changes that potential. What do I mean here? I mean, take basketball players. They tend to come from families that are tall. So the gentleman here, look at his parents. They are quite tall. They must be tall to have a child who's like 190, 195 centimeters. But he went taller than his parents. So he has inherited from his parents those genes to make him tall, but certain environmental factors, such as what? Such as diet, exercise, infections. Usually kids, little kids that tend to be sick continuously, they don't get the chance to get as tall as the ones that were healthy. So think of all the things in the environment that could make someone taller, including sun exposure, exercise, diet. But still, if parents weren't tall, if the guy did not inherit the genes from his parents who were tall, he wouldn't have been that tall. I think I'm saying the word tall too many of. So again, the genes you inherit, they give you a limit. They will give you a limit. So being from 180 centimeters to 2 meters. You influence the height by taking these factors. So if you went and got all the right things, including diet, sun exposure, exercise, then you reach the top limit of what you've inherited. Not only height, as I said, skin tone is another example, body mass is another example, level of intelligence, also we inherit this from our parents. So think of skin tone. She has relatively light skin tone. So that's what she inherited from her parents. But since it's continuous variation, her skin tone would change with the environment. So that how long she spends in the sun, that would change her skin color. So in brief, continuous variation is all the features that are influenced by the environment. They tend to show extremes, very tall, very short, and intermediate. And there is always more than one factor influencing this feature, including, which is the most important, the genes. Always the genes give you that limit to be taller, shorter, but then you influence this with certain environmental factors. Now, the best way to study variation is with identical twins. Do you know why? Do you know why identical twins would be really helpful for us to understand variation? So, when you have identical twins, any difference between them would not be genetic. You know why? Because identical twins come from the same sperm and the same egg cell. Which means what? Which means that they inherit identical DNA. All right? So, now, I taught many identical twins, and they are very different. They tend to be very, very different. Not with their looks, usually their behavior, their achievement. Each has their own like talent most of the times, and you can't relate this to their genes, not at all, because they've inherited that same gene. And yet, how did they form? It was one fertilized egg, one zygote. You know what happens to the zygote so that they become identical twins? This zygote splits by mitosis, and then you end up with two identical twins. So any difference that occurs later on with their life, it would only be because of the environment. So once in a TV show, they interviewed identical twins. One, you can see here, they have the exact same DNA. So what could be the only reason that one of them is like overweight? That only has to do with the environment, with their diet. Diet is an environmental factor, okay? Now, there's also the other types of twins. So how non-identical twins form. Non-identical twins, they're just siblings. We just call them twins because they were born at the same time. So non-identical twins, usually two sperms, two eggs, two zygotes, and each one of those embryos develops separately. Now, those non-identical twins, they could be boy and a girl. Again, they don't share the same DNA. They're siblings, right? But they don't have identical DNA by any means. All right, so let's do a quick recap on what we've learned today. We first learned the definition of variation. We said it's all differences among members of one species like us. And we said that there are two major causes of variation, which is the environment and your genes. Then we went and we talked about continuous variation, where individuals show gradual minimal differences among one another. And then here we are looking at twins, because if you have identical twins, then the only differences that they will show, it would be because of the environmental factors. So if continuous variation is one type of variation, what's we call the other type of variation? Simply, we're going to call it discontinuous. Do you remember what I've just said about continuous? I said it's environmental, you have intermediates, and there is always like the genes and the environment collaborate to form that height, skin tone, level of intelligence, body, all of these things. Discontinuous variation will be the complete opposite. So let's try this. I'm going to show you a feature, and you decide whether that feature is continuous or discontinuous. I just want you to put C or D if you think that feature shows continuous or discontinuous variation. Here you go. What do you think of foot size? Like, some people have very small feet, some people have larger feet. Does that feature shows continuous or discontinuous variation? Think about it. The best way to understand it is like this. Ask yourself this simple question. Is this measurable? Do we have separate categories? Is this influenced by the environment? Foot size is just like your height. It's measurable. It shows continuous. Some people have 33, 34, 35, all the way to 48, 49 foot size. So that is measurable. So it is continuous variation. All right, look what I wrote there at the bottom. I said it's a feature that is measurable, and it is about quantity. I mean, it's about numbers, okay? Now, think of blood groups. What do you think about blood groups? Is this continuous or is this discontinuous variation? Again, ask yourself this simple question. Is this measurable? Can I measure how much is my blood group? Is it influenced by the environment? Like being out, having certain diet, would that change my blood group? Not at all. So as long as it's not influenced by the environment, then it's always discontinuous. And it comes in separate categories. People usually fall into 4 major blood groups. Okay? Now, if genes are involved, which kind of variation is this one? So which kind of variation is influenced by your genes? Is it continuous or discontinuous? Listen to what I'm saying. I'm saying influenced. Okay? Look where I'm going to put this one. I am going to put it halfway because every single feature in your body is influenced by your genes, right? Whether it's continuous or discontinuous. The only difference here is that when it's continuous, it would be changing it all the way. Discontinuous, it would be the only factor. So again, with continuous, you will have the environment and the genes. But with discontinuous, it would only be the genes responsible for this feature. Okay? One more time, think of tongue rolling, because some people can roll their tongue. Some people, no matter how much they try, they cannot roll their tongue. Someone here is asking me, what does it mean when I say influence? Means affected. The genes change that feature. So because we have just 2 categories, tongue rollers, non-tongue rollers, then that is a discontinuous feature. Again, you're born with this kind of tongue or that type of tongue, then that's it. All right? So this is a qualitative feature, not measurable because we only have 2 categories. That's it. One more, if the feature is affected by the environment, if the feature changes with the environment, then it must be what? What did we just say about features that are environmental? We said that those are continuous all the way. And one last important features of continuous variation is this. It's the fact that people show gradual differences. It's the fact that it's always shown in like a line graph. Remember how I was representing discontinuous? I represented discontinuous with a bar chart, see? So that is typical for discontinuous, and that is typical for continuous variation. Okay? So in brief, your genes will affect every single feature in your body, whether it's continuous, discontinuous. Look at the feature, ask yourself one simple question. Does the environment change it? Yes, then continuous. So here's quick comparison, some features, and you guys tell me whether it is continuous or discontinuous. Gender. Is this like how many categories? We have just 2, I insist. So this is discontinuous, all right? Check your earlobe if you can and see that if it's that way or that way, because people, again, just like tongue rolling, people fall into 2 categories. You have attached and free earlobe. Both are good. So that's discontinuous, right? If that feature is represented with a line graph, then is this continuous or discontinuous? If it looks like whoop, line graph, It's always continuous. If it is measurable, if you can measure it with a weight balance, you can measure it with a ruler. How about skin color? Is skin color influenced by the environment? Yes, so always continuous. Genes are involved. Remember what I told you? Every single thing in you, in your behavior, in your body, it's always influenced by your genes. I told you this one, how your tongue rolls. If the feature is environmental, if it shows gradual change, okay? And categories. All right, I want you, when they ask you about a feature, usually it's worth 2, sometimes 3 marks. When they ask you about feature, whether it's continuous or discontinuous, you use exactly what is written here. And you reverse them for discontinuous. All right. Any question? So here's quick summary. It says variation is defined as the between members of the same. So what am I supposed to say here?
The differences between the same species.
So it's the differences among members of the same species. Why do we say same species? Because I look so much different from a cat, right? But that's not variation. We're meant to be different, okay? But I look different from my sibling, that's variation. Both affect your traits. What are the 2 things that affect your traits? Number 1, environment. Number 2, it's your genes. In continuous variation, traits show what kind of change? Right? Traits that show continuous can be represented using what kind of graph do we use here?
A line graph.
Line graph. Traits that show discontinuous, it's bar charts. And in categories, so such as here should be. So traits that show discontinuous, such as, I'm gonna pick blood groups for that, are in separate categories and they're always in a bar chart. Okay? Now, I just want to show you now what increases or decreases variation. Okay, so we're gonna now look at one of the major causes of variation. So here we go. We said initially, that's variation. And we said that there is the genes. And in many cases, environment. Okay, so many features are also influenced by your environment. Now, regarding the genes part, regarding whether genes are influenced, so what does make our genes look different? They're usually this factor we took before. It's a kind of cell division that results in variation. I want you to remember this very well whenever they ask you what causes variation. It's this meiosis, that cell division where sperms and eggs are formed. This does magic. It mixes up the genes of the mom and the dad together, so it would give us a lot of variation. Okay, so that is number one reason for variation. But there's even another factor which is just as important, and that is what we call mutations. So this takes us now to something very important, which is the definition of a mutation. So what is a mutation? Mutations are sudden changes that occur in our DNA that result in totally different or new traits. I'll repeat. A mutation is a change in the DNA that will result in a new feature that didn't exist before. So, quick definition worth 1 mark. What causes mutations in the first place? There are certain environmental factors and internal factors that cause mutations. Most of the times, mutations are either ignored, nothing shows in the first place. So errors in our DNA occur all the time and very rarely they show. Okay? And in many cases, they also cause harm. Think of cancer. Cancer results of a mutation. Very rare cases, mutations are useful. So one more time. Think, for instance, of factors like cigarette smoke. Tar of cigarettes is very well known to cause lung cancer. The reason here is that tar changes or causes damage to our DNA, and that damage results in tumors like cancer. Another factor that is known to cause mutations is radiation. Think of X-ray. Every time you go to do like an X-ray, there is always this sign, and they always make you wear something like this, like a vest made of lead. And even the guy who's the nurse or the doctor, they also wear the same vest. These vests are made of lead, and they're meant to protect them from radiation. Now, why radiation is one major cause of mutation? Because our DNA is very sensitive to this sort of ionizing or X-ray radiation, and the damage would result in, shown usually in the form of diseases such as cancer. So again, we need to be aware of 2 causes of mutations. 1 is radiation, 2 is chemicals such as tar. And as I said, most of the times these errors or the damage happens and it wouldn't be even noticed. Some cases are harmful, and very rarely those mutations are actually useful. I'll tell you more about this useful mutation because this takes us to the second part of today's lesson. Remember, what was the title of today's lesson? It was variation and selection. But before we get to the selection part, I would like you to try this question to tell me what you think is the correct answer. Oops. It says, which type of variation can be inherited? I mean, if that change happens to me, it would be passed to my children. Think of somebody who went to the gym. He worked out, his muscle mass is increasing, is muscular now. Do you think his baby will be born and the baby would also be like muscular? That's impossible, right? So usually you only pass type of variation that is only caused by your gene. Just keep this in mind. You go out in the sun, if you go sunbathe in the sun, that's not going to change how your children will look like, right? Do you get it? Try one more. This one. I think this one's easy, right? You should all know it. What is unlikely to be affected by the environment? Someone's telling me here, if the mom is overweight, isn't she likely to have an overweight child? Yes, because the mom has inherited this feature from her parents and she passed it on to her children. So obviously it's here, right? So health is not something that is not affected by the environment. Don't you get sick if you're like eating unhealthy or you're exposed to pathogens? Now, how about this for the definition of mutation? Can you tell what's the correct definition? That's been answered very well. That's not the right answer, right? It's don't change the environment. It's not about a change in your behavior, right? It's a change. What did we say? We said it's a change in DNA. Okay? All right. Now, I want you to listen to this definition very well. What's this definition? Usually this comes quite often and it's worth 2-3 marks. What's this about? This is the definition of a population. What is a population? These horses here represent one population, and to be members of the same population, you have to have 3 things in common. Number 1, they have to have the same, guess, to have the same species. Okay? Second, they have to live in the same habitat. I mean, they have to be in the same place to be same. Now, time is also an issue because humans living in this habitat where I live here, they're not all part of the same population because some of them have passed away, right? So that is what? Time. All right? So again, to be members of the same population, then they must be of the same species. They live at the same place at the same time. Now, why am I suddenly changing this, like the topic of today's lesson? Because I want to introduce you to this concept of adaptations, because this concept only applies on members of a population. So again, do you see what I have here? I got a group of giraffes. They are members of one population because you can see they're all giraffes. They all live in the same forest at the same time. Now, you can see here that I see variation. What kind of variation do I see here among those giraffes? I see continuous variation in their neck length. Now, as it is, there isn't any advantage. All giraffes have the same chance to survive. I mean, this giraffe here can eat from the grass or they can eat from the tree. It's a bit short to eat from the tree, but it can still eat from the grass because there's plenty of grass underneath. Oops. All right. Now, that's the initial case. So usually, always, there is variation among members of the same species, and usually the environment puts pressure on individuals. What do I mean here by pressure? I mean the environment tests to see which individuals are better adapted, better suited to survive. Like, for instance, in my case, if that environment has changed, if there was a change in the climate and the food decreased, who do you think is likely to survive that change in the environment? You can tell here that the giraffe with that short neck is struggling. Why is it struggling here? Because it can't reach to the food on the tree. This one here with a long neck has an advantage because it can eat from the grass and can eat from the tree on top. So that's one great advantage. Who do you think will survive? Obviously, that giraffe with that long neck will survive, and that one with short neck would not survive because it can't feed. Now, usually if individuals survive, they'll live long, common sense, and what really matters here is that they can reproduce. I mean, if it lives long enough, it would mature and it's likely to reproduce and have baby giraffes, offspring. If you wait thousands of years, these changes in the population, they take a long time, and you come back and you visit this habitat, what will you notice? You'll notice that all of the giraffes now have long neck. So this story here is what we call adaptations, changes in their features of those giraffes. And since it's happened in a long time, that's what we call evolution. One more time. Just learn this in this order. Step 1, it's always about variation, which is normal to happen. Step 2, environmental pressure, picking the better adapted individuals. Following this, the better adapted survives and the less adapted will die out. And those who survive, they will reproduce, and their offspring, their babies, will inherit this advantageous feature. With time, you'll find that the entire population is now better adapted, and that's what we call evolution. Okay? I'll repeat this in different contexts, but let's just take another example of adaptations because they're very common and they are a result of long time of evolution. So the animals you have, the plants you have around there, all have their own adaptations to survive their habitats. Think of camels and their big feet so they don't sink in the sand. Think of the short hair they have on the body because it's already too hot in their environment. Think of cobras and their venom. All of these features usually came from long time of evolution. Environmental pressure, picking and choosing the individuals that are better adapted. And usually what happens here, those features, is what we call adaptive features. So the camel, the cobra, the giraffe, all of these have their adaptive features which have helped them to survive and reproduce. So with the case of my giraffe there, it survived and reproduced because of his long neck. The camel because of his feet, because of the humps, because of the eyelashes, all of those features. So this combination of those two words, listen, the combination of survive, reproduce, we say that is fitness. So fitness in the context of survival is two things: to survive and to reproduce inside your environment. So once again, this is one definition here: adaptive feature. And this is my second: fitness. What does fitness means? It's the chance that an organism will survive and reproduce. So instead of me saying camels can survive and reproduce in the desert, I say camels are fit to live in the desert. All right? So when I say it's the best fit to live in the desert, that means that the camels have all the adaptive features to survive and reproduce in their environment. Okay? So, in brief, what did we learn here? We learned that there is always variation, regardless if it's continuous or discontinuous. And either way, this comes from the two major factors, the genes and the environment. And we said from the genes, we have two factors that will influence this. One is meiosis. Meiosis just shuffles the genes of individuals. It doesn't give you anything new. But there's also mutations. Mutations, we said they're harmful, but in some cases they give rise to some unique features. Think of all the things I showed you, like the venom, the humps of the camel, the camouflage, the way it changes skin. These all came originally from where? These all came from mutations. And it happens that those mutations were useful for this individual. So this variation gives me what? Gives me adaptive features. And those adaptive features help the organism to survive. What was the second word? Survive and reproduce. This combination of survive and reproduce, we gave it one word here. We say it becomes fitter, right? Fitness. And those that are fitter, they will pass, because they're reproducing, they'll pass these features to their offspring, to their babies. And the outcome now is that the entire population is becoming better adapted. And that's what we call evolution. Okay? So let me show you one example. I want you to help me with the series of events. So that's the same giraffe story I was showing you there. So what was the initial step? Can someone tell me what was the cause of this change in the giraffe over time? Where did we start from?
Variations
So
due to
that's right. So I'm gonna start with variation. Do you see what I've written here? I said the length of the neck of the giraffe, it shows variation, and this variation is because of some mutation. This long neck giraffe, it wasn't normal, but it turned out to be useful. So that mutation gave me new feature that turned out to be useful for their case. So following C, what is the next event? Can you think of what is the next event?
Selection pressure.
So selection pressure. What does selection pressure mean? The environment picks the individuals that are better adapted. What is the next event?
Actually, I just want to ask, may you go back to the slide about the environmental factors that cause mutations?
Yeah, can we continue this first?
All right, sure. I can't think of an answer right now, sorry.
All right. So the next one here, selection pressure. Following the selection, some individuals, they have those adaptive feature, all what it takes to survive, right? And following this,
B.
the adapted ones, they will survive and reproduce, means they're fit. And their outcome here is evolution by natural selection. Do you see those series of events? They come really very often. You just have to tweak the answer somehow to match the question. So this may come in case of a plant, may come in the case of bacteria. They all mean the same thing. Just keep this example in your mind and use it as a template. You just stamp it there on the exam paper and you write the series. I'm going to show you one more example. This one. Do you see this population? There is variation. There is some rabbit was born with unusual fur color. You see this guy. All the other rabbits have normal fur color. Now, selection pressure. What would be the selection? Think about it. What would be the selection pressure in this case that would favor the white rabbit?
So would it be like the camouflage?
Yeah, camouflage. So the selection pressure is the environmental factor that would pick and choose the better adapted one. So maybe something like this, right? Predator. This will hunt all the non-adapted, those that don't have the fur color. And this guy, on the other hand, because it has the adaptive feature, it would survive, it will reproduce, because it's barely seen in this environment. All right? So again, this mutation could have killed this rabbit if he was living in a different place. So say if he's living in warm place, being white like this, it would not be advantageous. But here's a great advantage because here it would help him to survive. So the mutation really is random. Just keep this in mind. It's a very random event, but when it happens in the right place at the right time, then that would be helpful. So once again, what happens in this case is what we call natural selection. This is where the environment picks and choose those that are better adapted, and that change in the rabbit population, I mean the rabbits going from being brown fur to white, being better adapted. Now the whole population of rabbits is becoming way better adapted. That's why I say this is evolution. All right? Make sense? Was this the one you were asking me about?
Yes, sir.
All right. All right, let's try this example. So what is the first thing you start with? You always start with V for variation, right? So I will always start here. They ask me such a question about variation. Then I look and find the selection pressure. So a predator. Following the selection pressure, so what would happen? You'll say the better adapted survive and the less adapted will die out. And then, now there's one key word here in my case, which is this one here. I want you to stress on it. I don't say the gene passes from parent to offspring. This is what makes the difference between good students and top students. Finding those best key terms to use in this context. Allele. Why did I choose the word allele? I did not say the gene passes because fur color is a gene. Fur color, whether it's white or brown, it's a gene. So when you say the gene passes from parents to their offspring, that doesn't make sense. But when you say the allele for white fur is the one passing, is the best way to say it. Again, what's the difference between me saying gene or allele? Gene is the main thing. Gene is fur color in general. But allele could be white or brown. So when you write the allele passes, this means that you understand that this particular color is the one is passing. Okay? So today we've learned many new words. I want to do a recap on the things we've learned. So here I have a list of definitions. Here I have their meaning. So can we try? Make it smaller. So let's try. Allele is like what?
A different form of gene.
So allele is different form of a gene. Good. Fitness was two things, right? Fitness is a combination of two events happening at the same time. So what is that fitness thing?
The ability of an organism to survive and reproduce.
That's right. So ability, survive, and reproduce. Variation, that's the first thing we took today. What does it mean when I say there is variation?
Differences among individuals of one species.
It's variation. Population, we said, is worth 3 marks. So what does the definition of population?
Group of organisms that live in one habitat.
You're right. Again, the proper way of saying it. One habitat, same species, at the same time. And what was the definition of a mutation?
Change in DNA.
Evolution is what then?
A change in adaptive features.
Okay, so it's a change in adaptive features like the long neck over time. Okay, and that's an adaptive feature. Okay, is there any question? All right, now I want just to master this evolution, natural selection. So I have one last example here. So again, if this comes for 5-6 marks, where do you start from here? What was the first event that results in this whole story about rabbits, about camels, about giraffes.
We say the variation in population.
So variation, good job, right? But what causes this unique new feature that pops in the population? We said the major cause is
Mutation. That's F.
various. So mutation causes this sort of variation. Good job. Now, what happens next that favors this particular feature? What do we say now? We check the question, we check the context of the question, and we find what could be the selection pressure. So I would go for what? Can someone try?
Advantageous alleles pass to the offspring.
So advantageous allele, I mean like the white fur passes to the offspring. Anyone? Here you go.
Organisms are under environmental pressure.
So there is always selection pressure from the environment that picks and chooses the better adapted. Anything? Any clue?
Some individuals are
Some
better
in-
adapted.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great minds think alike. So some individuals are better adapted. And those who are adapted, you know what happens? If you're adapted, then you'll live long enough, right? Then they reproduce and they pass it to their children. This causes a change in the adaptive feature. And this whole story, we say that this population has evolved, right? So I'm gonna repeat this one last time. First event is there's always selection pressure. Check those butterflies. That bird is eating them non-stop. A mutation happened here, and guess who was born? There was some unusual butterfly was born here. It was born with those spots, and those spots look like the eyes of an owl. So that bird here is scared of this butterfly, but it eats the rest. Okay, so again, this is very unusual. Look at it. It looks like eyes, and it was just happened randomly because of mutation. Now, what's going to happen? What would you expect to happen? You would expect those butterflies to survive and reproduce, unlike the other ones where they're easily eaten by the bird. If you wait thousands of years, you'll find that the entire population of the butterflies has changed from this shape to this one. That's what we call evolution by natural selection. All right, now I still have one more thing here, which is about antibiotics and bacteria. I'll do this tomorrow. For now, I want to start that test. So I'm gonna post that